Charles Edward Anderson Berry was born at 1 minute before 7 o'clock a.m. on October 18, 1926, at 2520 Good Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, to parents Henry William Berry and Martha Bell Banks. Later in his life, this newborn child of the Midwest would be known as the King of Rock and Roll, leaving as profound a legacy as Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, and Johnny Cash. It would not be an exaggeration to assert that without Chuck Berry, neither the Beatles nor the Rolling Stones would have been the bands we still admire today. Chuck Berry was the middle child in a family of 6 children. His mother provided comfort and care as she oversaw the cooking, cleaning, and child rearing, while Chuck's dad worked with hammer and nails outside the home. Although finances were tight, the family always got by. Chuck was attentive, focused, inquisitive, and enthusiastic, and excelled in academics, and he impressed his teachers at Simmons Grade School with his knowledge of science and photography. The Berry family home was always enriched with the sound of music. Young Chuck would listen intently to his mother playing piano and humming gospel tunes around the house. Chuck's father regularly recited poetry and also participated in the color plays staged at the family church. Later, as Chuck's older siblings began bringing records home and the family bought a Philco console radio, Chuck regularly heard the influential boogie and swing songs of such artists as Muddy Waters and Nat King Cole, providing him with a life-changing alternative to the church hymns he listened to during Sunday school. Chuck began learning piano from his mother, practicing regularly on the instrument at home and developing a knack for it. Chuck's motivation was to rebel against the classical music his sister, Thelma, constantly played. When a friend gave young Chuck an old 4-string guitar, he began to learn blues chords. He discovered that if he changed the way he stroked the strings or played the strumming tempo, he could adapt the chord progressions to different songs and styles of music. By summer of 1944, Chuck was almost 18 years old, and he and a few of his friends decided to take a trip from St. Louis to Kansas City. During their adventure, the boys robbed multiple stores and threatened a man. Chuck and his cohorts were caught and jailed for their crime, given the maximum 10-year sentence at the Intermediate Reform for Young Men, referred to as Algoa. While in prison, Chuck engaged his musical and religious backgrounds for creative and spiritual inspiration. He arranged a Sunday morning musical quartet to accompany prison church services, as well as a jailhouse boogie band, which would be requested to play at different events around eastern Missouri. After release from prison, Chuck resumed working with his dad and with his brother, Henry. On one May Day holiday at a spring festival, Chuck met his future wife, Thometta, who is called Toddy. Chuck and Toddy fell in love and were married on October 28, 1948. Toddy would give birth to the couple's first child, Darlin Ingrid Berry, on October 3, 1950. Chuck also began work as the janitor at St. Louis's WEW radio station. While at WEW, Chuck purchased his first 6-string electric guitar from a popular St. Louis guitarist named Joe Sherman. Chuck quickly used his new instrument to begin combining blues and swing musical forms into something new. He began a boogie band. On New Year's Eve, 1953, a popular St. Louis blues pianist named Johnny Johnson saw Chuck's boogie band and called Chuck, asking him to join his band. In Johnson's band, Chuck now played at a swanky club called the Cosmopolitan, where both black and white audiences would come to hear the band's rhythm and blues tunes. Chuck was stunned by the way his music affected both African American and Caucasian audience members. This would be Chuck's first real experience of the power of music to overcome racial differences, and would give rise to his appreciation of the role white teenagers would play spreading rhythm and blues music throughout the country. Throughout his career, Chuck would pay homage to the role of blues guitarists like T-Bone Walker and Elmore James, who he tried to mimic stylistically. Another of Chuck's musical favorites was the Chicago blues guitarist Muddy Waters. During a Muddy Waters show in May 1955, Chuck watched the iconic blues guitarist perform and later asked his hero how he could get a record deal too. Muddy told Chuck to go to the Chicago blues record label, Chess Records. Chuck rushed back to St. Louis, recorded some of his songs, and returned 1 week later with the tape. Chess wanted Chuck to record a song he called Ida Mae, but there already was a song out with that name, so the record label insisted on a new title. Chuck looked around the office and saw a secretary's mascara with the word Maybelline printed on it, and instantly suggested the name as the new title. Maybelline was the song that launched Chuck's career and was the first of a string of hits and commercial success that the guitarist would achieve in the coming years. In the second half of the 1950s, Chuck won over American and international fans of all kinds with many chart-topping tracks like Roll Over Beethoven, Too Much Monkey Business, You Can't Catch Me, School Day, Rock and Roll Music, Sweet Little 16, Johnny Be Good, Carol, Sweet Little Rock and Roller, Little Queenie, Back in the USA, Memphis, Tennessee, and others. His songs were assembled for release on long-playing records and compilations, and Chuck would perform in TV and in films, like the 50s teen movie Rock, Rock, Rock. Chuck Berry was enjoying incredible success as a performer. Unfortunately, Chuck's career suffered another setback. Chuck had violated the law by bringing an underage girl across state lines, allegedly for immoral purposes, and was indicted for violating the Mann Act. Berry was sentenced to 3 years in jail and a large fine. After serving his time, Chuck returned to discover that his formerly young fans were now growing, starting their own rock and roll bands and playing Chuck's songs. The Beatles recorded Roll Over Beethoven and Rock and Roll Music, including their versions on their second and fourth albums. The Rolling Stones recorded at least one Chuck Berry song for inclusion on each of their early albums, and even played Chuck's Around and Around on their first Ed Sullivan Show appearance in 1964. The Beach Boys rewrote Chuck's song Sweet Little 16, and in 1963 transformed it into a smash hit called Surfin' USA. And in the 1964 music concert film, The Tammy Show, Chuck performed alongside the Rolling Stones, James Brown, the Beach Boys, Marvin Gaye, the Supremes, and other greats. Many bands would play and record versions of Chuck's songs throughout the 1960s and 70s in particular. Even the notorious Sex Pistols covered a version of Johnny Be Good. By the end of the 1970s, it was clear that Chuck Berry's legacy was essential to the evolution of rock and roll music. Chuck was once again doing very well professionally and financially. He had played with John Lennon, met many other famed artists whom he admired, and was still performing concerts throughout the world. Chuck was a kicking 50-year-old grandfather when he once again ran into trouble and was imprisoned for non-payment of taxes. During this jail stint, Chuck decided to write his autobiography. He did this to take back some control over his life story, which many journalists had trashed in their reporting about his legal issues. In the years following Chuck Berry's release, the guitarist's career enjoyed a few new milestones. In 1979, Chuck performed My Ding-a-Ling at the White House. Most importantly, Chuck Berry was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on January 23, 1986. Chuck also had a presence in outer space, as the Voyager 1 spacecraft includes Johnny Be Good on the collection of Earth music contained on board. Finally, a concert movie called Hail Hail Rock and Roll was released in 1987 to commemorate Chuck's 60th birthday. The music director for the film was none other than the famed Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards. By the 1990s, Chuck Berry could do whatever he wanted musically as long as he kept out of legal trouble. There were a few more incidents involving Chuck that were settled out of court, and Chuck has been able to continue playing his music for his fans, both in the US and abroad, ever since. Chuck is currently 88 years old and resides with his family in St. Louis. He now enjoys a peaceful life after living a life of rock and roll on behalf of all music lovers of all backgrounds, in America and throughout the world.